Good morning, family. Today we're going to be continuing with our seven sins and virtues. Today we're going to be looking at comparing and contrasting pride and humility. I'm going to give you a forewarning. There's not that much I put on here about humility because when we get there, you'll understand. It's essentially just a lack of pride. Um, Pride, according to Webster's dictionary, is an exaggerated self-esteem. Self-esteem being the view of how oneself is worth, or what oneself is worth, right? Or as Webster puts it, the confidence we have within ourselves. So pride is essentially being overly confident to a point of actually valuing yourself over those that you see as less capable. So the dangers of pride is plentiful. Actually, pride is kind of one of those sins that invariably leads us to being to falling into other sins because we get blinded by it. And when I say blinded by pride, what I mean is it's not quite the same as wrath, right? Where wrath literally blinds you to everything around you and it puts you on a one-track mind. Pride makes you almost complacent to the point where temptation doesn't feel tempting anymore. So it lies and tells us that essentially we are all we need. So James chapter 4, verse 6 through 8, but he gives more grace. Therefore, it says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Submit yourselves, therefore, to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. And I'm convinced that there's a lot of conversation. There's a lot of times where somebody speaks like this, where it's almost a harsh speaking. And I think that the pride is one of the reasons they do this, because it's hard to be. You have one of two reactions when somebody speaks to you in this manner. You can either get defensive and give in to pride, or you can be humiliated, which is really just another word for being humbled. And interestingly enough, the only people that are capable of being humiliated are the people who are already prideful. So if you find yourself in a situation where you feel humiliated, you need to ask yourself why you were starting from a place of pride in the first place. So moving on, pride also allows us to believe that we are invariably more important than other people. Romans chapter 12, verse 3 says, For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. So, sober judgment, right? If I'm going to consider myself with sober judgment, there are only a few conclusions I can come to. I can come to the conclusion that I was made by a perfect God, right? Because all of this is coming from that place of faith that we talked about. So I believe I was made by a perfect God. I believe that I am far from perfect. And because I was made by a perfect God and am imperfect, my conclusion is that that must be my fault. So wherein there is room for pride. More importantly, where is there in that statement room for me to look at somebody else and say that I'm better or more important than they are? It's something I often like to remind teachers of, because as much as I love most of the teachers I've had in my life, sometimes, like preachers, they can get kind of a big head about the role that they play. And so, so one of the things I always like to remind them is, you're right. If you didn't exist, I would not be in school, right? But if I didn't exist, there wouldn't be much of a reason for you to be in school. It's the same thing with employers, employees, right? Yes, this business runs because you lead us, the workers. But at the end of the day, we all know you're not doing this job. So if we weren't here, you wouldn't have one. And it's one of those, I think many times people need to kind of have that pride in themselves shot down. But something that we all need to consider is if this only works from a place of unity, then you can't have more value than the people you're unified with. Right? You have different roles, right? You have elders, you have deacons, you have the ministry, you have the laymen, or however you want to word that, right? The members in general. But at the end of the day, if there were no members, wouldn't be much of a use for elders, would there? If there were no elders, the deacons would probably have a much harder time doing their job correctly. It's one of the things that society as a whole, they get all messed up about this because they believe that authority is value, right? If you have authority, then that makes you valuable. And it's one of the issues that has brought gender back into the church with such distinction, and the reason why people have such a hard time accepting the way the church is organized. Because, well, we give all the authority to men, and so we see men as more valuable. No. Just like an employer has no value without an employee, male leadership has no value if there's no one there to lead. It doesn't make you less valuable. It just gives you a different role in the organization. But it's hard for us to get that in our heads. It is. It's really, really hard for us not to see ourselves that way. Because who makes more money? The employer or the employee? And and this is kind of one of those issues with allowing ourselves to make culture our religion. And we do it all the time. There is so many things in the church that we do things the way we do things because we're middle-class Americans. And that has a much bigger part to play in how we do things than people often realize. But one of those is how we understand the church organization. And we have a hard time with that idea of value versus role because in society, that's how we see things. The person makes more money, so they're therefore more valuable. And so we move that over to the church, and we relate the elders to supervisors or managers. But in all reality, they're not making money either. So the whole analogy starts to fall apart. But we, in our anger, when we get upset about how things are, or the way that things aren't the way we believe they should be, we get to a point where we have a hard time looking at things logically. Where does that problem come from? That thing that blinds us to rationale and logic. It's pride. It's that belief that I should be so important and so valuable that I have to be acknowledged. That I have to have a job that no one else can do. I'm going to bring up a show that I know all of you guys watch regularly, because why wouldn't you? But my daughter watches Thomas the Train on repeat when we're in the car, right? and it's so bad that I actually know the stories now, which is weird because I never grew up with that show. But in one of these shows is a train that they have this soccer game going on, and each train is given a job. Yeah, I know, Bailey's laughing at me, but listen, I promise the story is relevant. So each train is given a job. One takes the team, one takes the fans, one takes the food, one takes the clothing. And the whole story is this one train is really upset because she has to take the dirty wash to the soccer game, and that's not a very important job. And it's amazing that on the surface we would just kind of disregard the story because it's a child's TV show, but don't we do that? Don't we have that issue ourselves? That's not an important job. I don't want to do that. Anyone can do that job. I have skills, so I should be put to use with that job. That all comes from this place of pride, that idea that I am so valuable that I must be unique. You're unique, just like everybody else. You are special, just like everybody else. So you see, what does your uniqueness have in value? Absolutely nothing. We in American society, we have taught people to take so much pride in the fact that they are unique from everyone else. And in all reality, when it comes down to brass tacks, it has no value for you to be that unique because everybody's unique. So in all reality, you're exactly the same as everybody else. You were made by the same Creator. You are just as imperfect, and you are saved by the same grace. Now, moving on with this idea of pride, it excuses us for any perceived wrongdoings. And this is to me, one of the most amazing functions that pride plays in our lives. That ability to blatantly do something wrong and refuse to admit that we did it wrong. Matthew chapter 7 verse 3 says, "Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when there is the log in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye." And it's amazing to me how often we as people can do this, where we are so prideful, we are so self-arrogant that we can actually convince ourselves that we're not in the wrongdoing when we're doing the exact same thing we're accusing somebody else of doing wrong. Right? I can't tell you how many times some of the most arrogant people I've ever met came to me and told me I need to address my arrogance. The guy that told me that because of his position in an organization, he should be allowed to dictate what my lessons on Sunday would be, told me that I need to address my arrogance. There's a lot more stories than that, but we do it all the time. I have done this more than once, and it's one of the things that elders have encouraged me to do more of. I hope that you realize that the reason that this particular lesson was picked this week is because it's a lesson that it's hardest for me to hear. And there's so many lessons I teach up here. I teach because I'm the one that needs them, and maybe you do too. I'll be honest, half the time I prep lessons and you guys are the afterthought. We'll move on to humility, right? Because we've looked at this idea of not only what pride is, but the downfalls of pride and what it can do to us. So here's humility. And according to Webster, right? Because Webster is so much better than most of the dictionaries that I can find access to. It is simply the freedom from pride or arrogance, which sounds really redundant for me to use it that way. But honestly, it is that simple. It is really that simple. If pride is this overinflated sense of self and self-worth and self-value, then humility is just simply the lack of that overinflated sense of self. Now you notice what isn't there. In that definition, we didn't tell you that you need to think that you are less valuable than anyone else. And that's a common misconception of humility, is that idea that I have to think you're more valuable than I am. Now we're going to address a verse that appears to contradict what I just said, and I'm going to explain why it doesn't. But to begin with, humility is necessary for unity. In Ephesians chapter 4, starting in verse 1, it reads, "Therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, I urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to the one hope that belongs to your call. Now, this is why pride tears all of that down, because humility is just one word in that big paragraph. There's a lot of key words there, and humility is just one of them. But here's the thing. If I am proud and I believe that I am more valuable than you are, and you believe you're more valuable than I am, then how are we going to settle differences? Well, the person with the most value wins, right? That's how arguments are settled among men, at least. If you're stronger than I am, then you win, then that means you're right. So if pride takes place in our brotherhood, in our congregation, and we're called to treat each other from a desire of unity, then how are we going to settle differences in the face of that pride? Well, then you have elders become tyrants. You have deacons that hold their jobs over other people's heads. You have members that withhold contributions. You have everybody believing they're the most important person in the room, and they will hold whatever unity they have, any kind of involvement they have, as a hostage. And where does that leave us as a church? Because here's the thing, it happens all the time. In fact, that is at its core what we do when we say, I will leave. When a member says, I don't like how this is, so I'm going to leave, all that is me believing that I am so valuable and I have so much pride in my own correctness that I am willing to hold my membership hostage over me getting my way. But we don't like talking about that, do we? We don't like talking about the fact that you owe something to this congregation. Where would I be if I decided every time something didn't go my way that I was just going to go find a different church to preach at? I know I don't ask for a lot of involvement in our sermon, but I'm going to ask the question. One of the elders can answer me. Keith, Jay, do you guys always agree with me? Oh. You guys ever told me no? So would it be safe to say I was here for, I think, 3 or 4 weeks before the first time you guys told me no on something? You know what? I was figuring things out for those first few weeks, okay? I didn't push very many envelopes. But think about that. How would that look if I acted the same way that so many people in the church do, and I'm just like, well, they didn't agree with me. They didn't change what I want to change, so it's time for me to move on. Where would the church be if everybody reacted that way? The simple fact is the congregation feeds you spiritually in many different ways. You have shepherds that have taken responsibility for the caretaking of your eternal soul. You owe something to them. Whether you want to believe that or not, you owe something to them for that. You have deacons that have taken over administrative roles for the church so that things can be ran without chaos in an orderly fashion. We owe something to them. And leaders, we have members that come, that make contribution, that listen to the lessons, that do the work when we need them to do the work. And guess what? We owe something to them for that. How prideful, how arrogant must I be to decide that I owe nothing to anybody? When Jesus Christ died for you, he didn't take away your debt. He bought your debt. That's what redemption means. you don't get out of debt. The person that carries it just changes. We'll move on. The second point is it's a sign of who we are, this idea of humility. In Colossians chapter 3, verse 11, it says, "Here there is not Greek and Jew, circumcised and uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and in all. Put on then as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meek and patience, bearing with one another, and if one has complaints against another, forgiving each other. As the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive." You notice something about that last part, right? Where it talks about if somebody has wronged another, right? Specifically, if one has complaint against another, whose responsibility is to make that complaint right? The person complaining, right? If I have a problem with something that Dan is doing because I feel like he needs to be more on top of his job, it's not his responsibility to make me feel better about the fact that he doesn't do it the way I want him to. It's my responsibility to just forgive him. Dan, I don't have a problem with the way you do your job. please don't ignore me. The next part is it leads others to praise God, but it also leads God to praise us. And I've talked to you about this before because we so often think that the desire to be praised is a form of pride, but it's not. The desire to be praised actually comes from a place of humility, because nobody desires praise from somebody beneath them. In order for you to desire to be praised, you have to think of that person as elevated. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 6, "Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you." I talked about this a while back, the first time I ever talked about desiring God to glorify us, right? If I place myself up all the way on a pedestal to where I am the greatest human being that's ever existed, I am the most important, I am the most valuable, I'm the most intelligent, I'm the strongest person to ever live or who lives currently, where is there left for me to go? What's God going to lift me to from there? So the best way, if you're looking for praise, right, and this is kind of a warped statement a little bit, but it's like I tell people, the best way to get people to be happy with you is to keep their expectations low. So the best way for me to seek out God's praise is to see myself as lower than others and act greater. And that's why leaders are called to see themselves as servants. Proverbs chapter 6, sorry, I have the wrong, I don't have my chapter written down, I apologize. It says, "It is better to be of a lowly spirit with the poor than to divide the spoil with the proud." Here's the thing. There are charismatic people in the world, people who can, usually they become salesmen or preachers, all right? We are the people that we can generally argue ourselves out of any corner. We can explain to you why you need whatever it is that we have that we want you to take. We're good at it. Is it fun to be around that all the time, though? I mean, really, like, for those of you who choose to actually be around me outside of Sundays, Would you actually be interested in me being around you all the time if all I ever did was sat here and told you what you need to correct in your life all the time? Think about this. For me, and maybe some of you guys are different. Maybe you just don't feel this way about salesmen. I hate being around salesmen in a professional standing. All right, if you're a salesman, don't get me wrong. I still care about you. I'll hang out with you. I'm just not coming to your place of business. But I hate dealing with salesmen. If I go to a car lot, I want you to stay in your stupid little building and leave me alone and let me look at the cars that you have on the lot. And I will come to you when I'm ready to ask a question. Right? If I go into a store, right, because I love going into suit shops. I love looking at suits. I love seeing all the different styles. But here's the thing. I'm not buying a suit from you because your suits cost almost a week's worth of salary for me, and I have bills to pay. Okay? But I like to go look. That does not mean I want a salesman to follow me around the store and say, oh, do you want to see these Oxfords? No, they're $400. I'm not looking at your Oxfords. And it doesn't matter what place of business you talk about. The salesmen have just this presence about them that just grates on me. Now, why is that? It's that just idea that I have something and you need what I have, and I'm going to tell you why you need to buy what I have to sell. It's just the audacity of it just irritates me. So the point in all of this is, I used to work retail a long time ago. I stopped because, customer service is not really my forte. But I remember in retail, we always had these competitions, right? Because you'd have a certain product each month and there'd be a competition. So if you sold more of that product than anyone else, then that means you would get a prize or you'd enter a drawing or I don't know, they always came up with something each month, right? And I found that the best way for me to make those sales was for me to leave people alone. Do you know why? Because that was the product of the month. It had the flashiest sign. There would be lights pointing to it. I mean, we put the signage in big letters. I mean, you weren't going to miss the product. But what happens if I start pushing people like, hey, look, I got this product. It's on sale right now. We got a great deal on it. And you're thinking to yourself, I just want to get away from you. Well, I'm the salesman. You want to get away from me, and I want you at that product. So what's the best place for me to be? Not at the product. My point in all of this is we as people, believers or unbelievers, we as people have a natural desire to stay away from people like that. We don't want to deal with it. And that I believe is this pride and humility part. But ultimately, at the end of all of this, the big message for us to take away from this whole idea of pride and humility is we are created in the image of God. And God loved the world so much that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever may believe in him will have eternal life. This is John 3:16. Everybody knows that verse. If you've been to church twice in your life, you know that verse. But isn't that a statement of God's humility? Isn't that a statement of how much God thinks of us? That at the very beginning, he created creation to serve us, and we were created to serve him. And when we failed at that, he died for us. Yeah, I think of all the ways I've betrayed God, and I think to myself, if I had a friend treat me half the way I've treated God, there'd be no forgiveness there. There'd be no saving. I certainly wouldn't be giving my life up for them for it. Man, if people treated me half as bad as I've treated God in my life, that the world will be a very lonely place for me. If we're created in the image of God, we're called to act godly. If we're called to act godly, then that means that when somebody wrongs us, we come from a place of humility, a place where we seek to serve that person and help them. Not demanding retribution, not demanding vengeance or for our wrath to be fulfilled, but to seek forgiveness. Humility is the thing that binds all believers together, I think, more than almost any other virtue. That understanding of just how low we are and the willingness to treat others as more important than we are. And I think that pride might be one of the most overt sicknesses in the congregation. In any congregation. You go to any church, you can tell who's prideful and who's not. And it's something that we have to address. It's something that I have to address within myself, and I have to believe that there are many of you that have to address it for yourselves as well. This morning we make offer, just as we always do when we gather together, for anyone who would seek out forgiveness, to seek out a chance to confess sin or to confess Christ before others, whether you're looking for prayers from your fellow saints, whether you're looking for reconciliation to a brother or the congregation as a whole, whether you're looking to be washed clean of that guilt in the waters of baptism, to be washed clean of the betrayals that we are all guilty of. Whatever your needs are this morning, we ask that you bring them forward and make them known so we can help you see them met as we stand and sing.